Is this on? Okay. So hello everyone, my name is Murat, and initially I was planning on presenting a scripted presentation, but in accordance to our theme I'm going to try something new and hope I triumph. So, as our first presenter said, I'm a graduate of this school. And 7 years ago, how many of you were here 7 years ago? Please raise your hands. Okay, time does fly. So 7 years ago, I was on the stage playing a role. I was playing a mad scientist, hell-bent on reanimating the dead and other strange things. And now, in a way, I'm working on what some perceive an area of mad science. Anyways, in 2010, another thing that happened is IB psychology students, please raise your hands. Psychology, standard, high level, doesn't matter. Okay. So 7 years ago at FZ02, when we were choosing our IB courses, I decided to choose psychology. And 2 years later, I didn't do well in the exams, but something stuck. And whatever it was, it continued in university. And now, for my master's, I'm trying to create brains in silicon. Anyways, back to the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll indulge me for the next few minutes, I will take you on a little journey, exploring our theme, Try and Triumph, from a different perspective, one that is between our ears. As you all know, we Homo sapiens are a curious bunch. We love to explore, we love to discover, but unfortunately for the Homo sapiens of our time, the age to discover our planet, the chance to explore our vast blue planet has faded, as we have virtually visited and mapped every corner of our planet. What about beyond our planet? Space, or to quote Star Trek, the final frontier. Sadly for us, we're only taking our baby steps out there and won't be gallivanting among the stars anytime soon. In our awkward era of transition between frontiers, you might feel trapped, waiting for the technology to arrive. But this age of ours also happens to be the amazing time in which we explore what makes us want to explore in the first place, the brain. Let's delve into the unknowns of the mind with neuroscience as our guide. This is an area of science that looks at what makes us tick, literally. Neuroscientists explore the brain from many different angles. We explore the brain from the macroscopic level, looking at how different areas interact with each other. We look at it from the cellular level, looking at how individual cells, neurons as we call them, communicate with each other. Well, we even take the submicroscopic effects into account, but that is a talk for another time. So doctors, chemists, engineers, philosophers, so many experts from so many fields are working around the clock, solving the secrets of the brain. Yet, we are still lost in the vast forests of the mind, looking for answers. So far, we have only scratched the surface. But, from what we know, I will explain to you the neuroscience of Try and Triumph. So before we go slicing in, don't worry, this is a cow brain, not a human brain. Before we go slicing in, let's first look at the basic building blocks, neurons. Like the humble ones and zeros of digital technology, these little organic lumps zip and zap around, making our minds work. But how do they function? On the basic level, all neurons function the same way. They have a body, we call a soma, an axon, and connections to other neurons, we call synapses. Think of these as a handshake signal. So the head receives inputs from other neurons, and decides whether or not it should fire. And if it does decide to fire, it generates a signal that rushes across the axon and dissipates among the synapses. So, to repeat myself, the head processes the inputs, the axon carries the message, and the synapses distribute it using chemicals we call neurotransmitters. These are what synapses look like in real life. You could only see them with electron microscopes, and to really see them you have to look at it for a while, which we don't have. So, moving on to our theme, try and triumph. According to my good friend, dictionary.com, try means to attempt, to do, or to accomplish. Examples, we could try to throw a basketball, run a marathon, or even give a TEDx talk at your old high school. Triumph, on the other hand, is a significant success or noteworthy achievement, instance, or occasion of victory. Going back to our examples, for basketball, it's throwing the ball through the hoop. For the marathon, it's crossing the finish line. For the TEDx talk at your high school, we'll see. So, let's look at the basketball example a bit better. Here I am, 5 years ago, and here's a basketball. It's been literally 5 years since I held a basketball in my hand, so I've decided to use virtual reality. So I'm going to magically pull the basketball to me, then give it a nice, weak throw. Well, that was a fail. Okay, let's try a strong shot this time. Once again, I will it towards me, then give it a nice strong throw. Oops. Okay, so I know not to throw too weak, not to throw too strong. I'm going to remember this, and in my third try, I am going to get it right. So, what happened here? Let's break it down. Motivation. I was motivated to throw the basketball through the hoop. I tried, I failed. I tried again, I learned from my mistakes, I remembered them, and in the end, I got a reward. We could categorize these to our theme as follows, then filter out the neuroscientifically unrelated ones, leaving these. So let's begin with the fun ones. The reward system, or the reward pathway. This pathway, highlighted in red, is one of the main sources of happiness within our minds. It is a system of neurons that fire when we achieve our goals. They release dopamine and similar neurotransmitters and give us the feeling of happiness. Dopamine, the key word here, is a neurotransmitter, a chemical used for communication between two neurons. It is used in multiple pathways within the brain, and it makes us happy. So at the end of this presentation, when I'm like, poof, it's over, I'm going to get a dopamine rush. So, motivation. Let's move on. What is motivation? So I'm giving you 3 seconds, make a definition in your mind. 1, 2, 3. Who has a definition? Raise your hand. Thank you for being brave. So, thank you as well for being brave. Okay. So I'll just answer it. Motivation is a desire to perform an action. Why do we desire to perform that action specifically? To achieve a reward or to avoid a punishment. In both cases, to get a nice healthy dose of dopamine. So we're all most of us are students, so we'll know. In order to keep going, sometimes we imagine succeeding the task. We imagine passing the test, we imagine winning the game, etc. We imagine the rewards we'll get, all the unpleasantries we will avoid. This makes us want to succeed. This is caused by a relatively small activation of the reward pathway, just enough to get us going. Think of it as the trailer to that upcoming movie you want to see. And in a nutshell, this is motivation. So what happens next? Let's recap. We tried, we failed. We tried again, we failed again. We repeated these over and over until eventually We succeeded. So what happened here? What happened here? So that's where learning and memory come into play. So memory is like an archiving room used to store what we have learned. We call this information memory. Unlike how it's portrayed here, the process of storing information in the brain is a bit more complicated. I'm sorry to say, guys, you don't have miniature versions of this character in your brain storing information. The true term for how we store information is potentiation. And as you can see from this cartoon, growing neurons need three things: activity, making connections, and communications to grow. So the strength of the synapses, the connections between neurons, depends on the amount of activity. A more active neuron makes more connections, has a stronger impact, and as we say in neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So I'm going to show it on this example. Our neuron is very active and is firing. So imagine it's just fired over a lot, over and over. Eventually, its connections will increase and get stronger. On the other hand, a weak neuron, one that doesn't move at all, its connections will slowly wither away until none remain, get weaker or disappear, and with enough trials, the most optimal pathways form. Less energy and processing is required to achieve success. So here I just wanted to inject a quote from one of my old English teachers at this school. Practice doesn't make perfect. No, practice makes permanent. Said by Mr. Dale Scroggins back in 2010. And that's what neurons do. Successful synaptic connections become harder to lose. So try and triumph in the brain. The reward pathway releases dopamine when we accomplish our goals, leading to the feeling of success and victory. Imagining our success at the end of the task gives us a sneak peek of what we can achieve, thus motivating us. We learn from our mistakes and store this information in our memory for the next time we try. And this is done, all of this is done with neurons. So can we somehow inspire from this? A few weeks ago, this guy tried to steal my simit in front of my department. This guy is a common bird. I don't know his type. But studying these led to this. So can we say the same about studying the brain? Well, how familiar are you with this term? Raise your hands if you've somehow seen, heard, or somehow perceived it. So yes, artificial intelligence is artificial systems based on neuroscience. An example, let's take a neural model, convert it into a series of mathematical equations, then implement these equations in a model. We then take these models, connect them to each other, and give them inputs to train them for a certain task. And with each consecutive input, the connections change. Some become stronger, others become weaker. And eventually, it does what we want it to do. Just the same way we try to learn something by repetition. Artificial neural networks, as we call them, works, repeats, tries again until they triumph and do what they want to do. So this is not what they look like. This is what they look like in real life. Here's part of one I coded last year. And what this does is, you give it handwritten digits, hundreds of thousands of them, and eventually it will form a perception for each digit. I know these don't look like the digits, but that's what the network sees. And if we give this a digit, let's say 8, it will take it and compare it to all of them in its perception until it finds the correct one. In which case, when we ask it again, it will tell us what it is. So about artificial neural networks. Face recognition on social media uses these. You've probably uploaded a photo to Facebook and it says, I recognize this person. Shall I tag him or her? That's these at play. Siri, the voice-controlled assistant. It's also based on this technology. data analysis, stock market predictions, even the destruction of humanity. Okay, forget that one. That one's debatable, and it's, even if it's likely, it's not, it's at least 50 years away, so no need to panic. So that's what artificial neural networks do. So yes, the brain is the grand frontier of our era. Studying it makes us understand ourselves better. Imitating it has given us powerful tools. Who knows what else we'll discover in the future? And seeing as we're coming to a close, we have to try to find out. And seeing as we're coming to a close, I wanted to end my presentation with one of my favorite quotes about the brain. If the human brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be so simple that we couldn't. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you good night.